In the past month, the global warming campaign has won a great victory. The United States government, once a bastion of resistance, has succumbed. George Bush is now an ally. Western governments have now embraced the need for international agreements to restrain industrial production in the developed and developing world. But at what cost? Paul Driesen is a former environmental campaigner.
My big concern with global warming is that the policies being pushed to supposedly prevent global warming are having a disastrous effect on the world's poorest people.
Global warming campaigners say it does no harm to be on the safe side. Even if the theory of man-made climate change is wrong, we should impose draconian measures to cut carbon emissions just in case. They call this the precautionary principle.
The precautionary principle is a very interesting beast. It's basically used to promote a particular agenda and ideology. It's always used in one direction only. It talks about the risks of using a particular technology, fossil fuels, for example, but never about the risks of not using it. It never talks about the benefits of having that technology.
Anne Muagela is about to cook a meal for her children. She is one of the 2 billion people, a third of the world's population, who have no access to electricity. Instead, they must burn wood or dried animal dung in their homes. The indoor smoke this creates is the deadliest form of pollution in the world. According to the World Health Organization, 4 million children under the age of 5 die each year from respiratory diseases caused by indoor smoke, and many millions of women die early from cancer and lung disease for the same reason.
If you were to ask a rural person to define development, they'll tell you, yes, I'll know I've moved to the next level when I have electricity. Actually, not having electricity creates such a long chain of problems, because the first thing you'll miss is the light. So you get that they have to go to sleep earlier, because there's no light. There's no reason to stay awake. I mean, you can't talk to each other in darkness.
No refrigeration or modern packaging means that food cannot be kept. A fire in the hut is too smoky and consumes too much wood to be used as heating. There is no hot water. We in the West cannot begin to imagine how hard life is without electricity. The life expectancy of people who live like this is terrifyingly short, their existence impoverished in every way. A few miles away, the UN is hosting its conference on global warming in its plush gated headquarters. The gift shop is selling souvenirs of peasant tribal life, while delegates discuss how to promote what are described as sustainable forms of electrical generation. Africa has coal, and Africa has oil, but environmental groups are campaigning against the use of these cheap sources of energy. Instead, they say Africa and the rest of the developing world should use solar and wind power. A short drive out of Nairobi, we find our first solar panel. A Kenyan public health official has brought us to a clinic which serves several villages. The only electrical implements in the clinic are the electric lights and a refrigerator in which to keep vaccines, medicine and blood samples. Electricity is provided by 2 solar panels.
So what can it do successfully?
Lighting.
Lighting only?
Yes.
What happens when you put lighting plus the refrigerator and others? What happens?
It sounds an alarm.
It sounds an alarm?
Yeah.
Then can we maybe see that?
The solar panels allow Dr. Samuel Mwangi to use either the lights or the refrigerator, but not both at the same time. If he does, the electricity shuts down. Wind and solar power are notoriously unreliable as a source of electricity and are at least 3 times more expensive than conventional forms of electrical generation.
The question would be, how many people in Europe, how many people in the United States are already using that kind of energy, and how cheap is it? You see, if it's expensive for the Europeans, if it's expensive for the Americans, and we are talking about poor Africans, You know, it doesn't make sense. The rich countries can afford to engage in some luxurious experimentation with other forms of energy. But for us, we are still at the stage of survival.
To former environmentalist Paul Driesen, the idea that the world's poorest people should be restricted to using the world's most expensive and inefficient forms of electrical generation is the most morally repugnant aspect of the global warming campaign.
Let me make one thing perfectly clear. If we're telling the third world that they can only have wind and solar power, what we are really telling them is you cannot have electricity.
The challenge we have when we meet Western environmentalists who say we must engage in use of solar panels and wind energy is how we can have Africa industrialized. Because I don't see how a solar panel is going to power a steel industry, how a solar panel, is going to power maybe some railway train network. It might work maybe to power a small transistor radio.
I think one of the most pernicious aspects of the modern environmental movement is this romanticization of peasant life, and the idea that industrial societies are the destroyers of the world.
One clear thing that emerges from the whole environmental debate is the point that there's somebody keen to kill the African dream, and the African dream is to develop.
The environmental movement has evolved into the strongest force there is for preventing development in the developing countries.
If you're being told, don't touch your resource, don't touch your oil, don't touch your coal, that is suicide.
I think it's legitimate for me to call them anti-human. Like, okay, you don't have to think humans are better than whales or better than owls or whatever if you don't want to, right? But surely it is not a good idea to think of humans as sort of being scum, that it's okay to have hundreds of millions of them go blind or die or whatever. I just can't relate to that.
The theory of man-made global warming is now so firmly entrenched, the voices of opposition so effectively silenced, it seems invincible, untroubled by any contrary evidence, no matter how strong. The global warming alarm is now beyond reason.
There will still be people who believe that this is the end of the world, particularly when you have, for example, the chief scientist of the UK telling people that by the end of the century, the only habitable place on the Earth will be the Antarctic. And humanity may survive thanks to some breeding couples who move to the Antarctic. I mean, it's hilarious. It would be hilarious, actually, if it weren't so sad.
3:15 tonight, dispatches, and how green are our politicians and business leaders. Next Monday night at 8, dispatches again, this time focusing on Prince Charles, independent monarch or meddling prince. Next tonight, Mammoth Movie, the beautiful tale of a fateful love affair, the English Patient.